Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between.
Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between. With your host, Barry Kirby.
Welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Whilst I've had the opportunity to interview some fantastic people in some fantastic organisations, it's not often you get a true legend in the human factors world to come and have a chat to. He's also possibly one of the most outspoken people I've seen on LinkedIn, and if you put something down there that he doesn't like, he doesn't really beat around the bush to tell you exactly what he thinks, which a lot of people think that is a fantastic thing to have in today's world where we may be not direct enough. So it's probably just by that introduction I've whittled it down already to only one individual, and that is Professor Bob Stone. Bob, welcome.
Right, thank you. Legend is very kind. Most people would say leg end, but I like the introduction that's focused on LinkedIn. Yes, sometimes being called the Simon Cowell of LinkedIn. I'm a really nice guy, honestly. As some of my human factors people will tell you. I just because I'm getting on there and I see so much hype and nonsense on LinkedIn, it gets my blood pressure. It gets my blood pressure boiling.
Well, you hide it well, said nobody ever. So I mean, talk about the LinkedIn. I mean, you've had a long career in human factors now, 41 years. It says on your LinkedIn that you're retired, or at least semi-retired. What does that mean? How does a guy like you retire?
It's a bit of a long story. I mean, I did actually officially retire in July 2019, and unfortunately, I felt the need to go because my team and I weren't getting the support from the university that I felt we deserved, despite the fact that the students were clamoring for the kind of projects we do, particularly when our projects take students out into the real world. It's not just behind a desk, behind the lab or in the lab. Yeah. So I did take official retirement. They did convince me to come back 1 day a week, which was also not a particularly clever thing to have done. So semi-retirement, I thought, well, now's the time to go off and maybe try and get some advisory positions with companies and other organizations. And as we were talking about earlier, this idea of people who need to stay active, semi-retirement or retirement, you tend to ask what semi-retirement. It's been completely crazy since I have come out. I mean, with a little bit of luck, even as we speak, I think I'm going to be given an emeritus professor position back at the University of Birmingham, but I'm also working closely with the University of Plymouth and a few others, and Malaysia. In fact, literally 2 days ago, I was doing an online presentation. The Vice Chancellor there announced I was going to be a research advisor for the Malaysian University's advanced computing setup. So again, I don't need these things for a CV anymore because I'm too damned old, but it keeps the brain going. And that's so in between that and building science fiction models, which people will also have seen on LinkedIn, one of my absolute passions being from the 1960s, and what drove my career in ergonomics, I think. I'll put it down to people like Jerry Anderson. But it's kept me going, particularly during the pandemic.
So you mentioned about what got you into ergonomics. How did you get into human factors and ergonomics? What inspired that? Or what was that first step?
Well, the first step was I was doing psychology undergraduate degree at University College London, and I mean, even though I enjoyed things like clinical psychology and social psychology, I was always more attracted towards the occupational psychology side of things. And then I just discovered by absolute pure chance that literally across the road from Gower Street was the original ergonomics unit, right, with Harry Moore, God rest his soul, and Rachel Birnbaum, as was Rachel Benedict today. And I went over there initially to ask if I could borrow their police breathalyzer, because I was doing a study on the effects of alcohol on psychomotor skills, in other words, dart throwing, which was an incredibly popular student experiment, believe you me. And I started talking to and Harry Moore, absolutely inspirational. And I'm thinking, well, and they did things like control panels, going back to Jerry Anderson, and they did things like drive tube trains and go down coal mines, and some of the courses were held at the institute, what was the Institute of Aviation Medicine and Army Personnel Research Establishment down at Farnborough. I thought, this is what I want to do. So I basically did. I took the MSc down there and never looked back. Never ever looked back.
Brilliant. So you kind of have taken that traditional route. Then you've got the academic qualifications, and then you move into industry.
Yes, I was very lucky. Again, it's a story of luck. About a third of the way through the MSc course, I was pushed into applying for a job at what was British Aerospace Dynamics down at Filton in Bristol, by my colleagues, by my contemporaries. And I thought, no, I didn't want to. And I'd been developing an interest in the advanced flight deck, which of course wasn't at Filton. It was in Weymouth, not Weymouth, just south of London, the original one, the original advanced flight deck of the time. So I put my little CV in, got invited down, and Paul Day and Alan Smith were on the interviewing panel. Got offered the job, was taken next door to good old Dr. John Hubbard's office, who was the head of department, and I was offered the job, and they kept it open until the MSc was completed, which was phenomenal.
Yeah.
So I got into something where, again, it sounds a bit naff talking about Jerry Anderson, but I did that as a kid. I designed control panels. I drew control panels on the wall, for goodness sake. and this ergonomics thing was like sort of manna on a plate.
So what sort of projects did you get involved with then? Because obviously when you joined, when you joined BAE, then that's pre-Salby days. So what sort of projects were you getting involved in at that time?
Yeah, very, very much pre-Salby. And I think my first ever project was a control panel redesign for the Swingfire, the Swingfire missile. And we used to work with, for example, they had the terrain model over just around the corner from Barmore Hall. Yeah. And we used to go down there and spend all night repositioning little scale tanks in this terrain model, mocking up Eastern Europe and filming things. And I remember sitting there with a camera and flicking the switch to the camera would scan left and right, only for a huge spider to come running across the terrain model, because it was very rural out there, to ruin the whole blooming thing. I suppose. Yes, there were the obvious defence projects, looking into if the effect of NBC gear on interacting with systems and so on. But it took a strange turn in that not that long into the job at BAE, a dear friend and obviously and a late friend, Richard Holman, had confidence to put me onto a project which is being done for the Department of Energy, which is looking at human factors, aspects of manned and remotely operated submersibles for North Sea oil and gas. And again, that was a case of being in the right place at the right time, because if you then take that forward in terms of what I'm doing today, that couldn't have been a better opportunity. Really couldn't have been a better opportunity.
That's really quite impressive, because like I said, that was before they opened up the Salby building and did that move. How did you find? How did you find the sort of attitude to human factors then, to kind of how it evolved, where we are now? Because even now we seem to be fighting that uphill battle all the time to get HF taken seriously, or for it not to be cut when times are tight. What was it like then, trying to get that message over?
In many respects, it was a lot easier, as you say, than what we're still experiencing today, unfortunately. But there seemed to be a recognition, and this was emphasised in the Department of Energy contracts, that people believed that there was a future where, for example, we could remove humans from hazardous environments. Therefore, to do that, we need to talk to somebody who understands the human brain. That's how naive it was looked at in those days. From a defence perspective. Again, different departments, different engineering departments throughout BAE were very, I wouldn't say anti, but very sceptical about that we were, again, a bunch of academics stuck at the other end of the runway and doing stuff that was icing on the cake, far too expensive and took far too long, which is a real shame. But gradually we chiseled away, and I think internally and certainly throughout the Department of Energy projects, we demonstrated what value human factors really has in the real world.
This podcast is supported by K-Sharp, the human science research and human factors consultancy. If you want to know how innovating in the relationship between humans and technology can add value to your business, product, or research, then visit www.ksharp.co.uk.
If we can demonstrate that value all the time, because it is it's a difficult sell because it's a spend to save, really, and that's always a difficult one to try and sell people, especially if they're not doing it. But yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. That actually the overall challenge hasn't really changed. It's just taken on different guises. So then you moved into the Sowerby building and worked with the team there. I believe you were the boss of my old boss, Laird Evans.
Yeah.
So, what sort of did you see a step change in what you were doing when you moved into the Sowerby building, or was it just same old stuff, just in a different place?
Oh no, there was a definite step change, and I think it was a step change that coincided with general developments in human factors and ergonomics academically as well, and it became more cognitive. So we were moving away from tables and chairs, knobs and dials, which I still love even to this day, and anthropometry, biomechanics, the good old stuff, the bread and butter stuff, into more looking at performance modeling, things like carbon nannules, GOMs, and as was back then, and very much like human vision. And there was always a very strong human vision department within human factors, if you remember. But the kind of projects started to change quite dramatically, and I think that was a combination of we found ourselves in Sowerby in competition with the divisions, a number of which had their own human factors capability and didn't really want to share. Right. And we certainly found that quite challenging on occasions. But also we started moving into areas we never thought we would. So as a result of the 4 years that we were doing work on manned and remotely operated submersibles, we then found ourselves working with BAE Stevenage to look at remote operations for low Earth orbit and the future of the European space industry. And that was quite an amazing setup. I remember it was called teleoperation and control. And then we did some work on looking at, unbelievably back then, information displays on astronauts' EVA helmets. And we were looking at rendezvous and docking, manned rendezvous and docking for spacecraft. So wow. it changed, and Laird and I were actually working on that, and various other things. I mean, even things like we found ourselves going out more. So we would find ourselves on the old longbow barge in Cardigan Bay, where Laird and I have been working on a special breakup simulator trainers because they were testing vertical launch Seawolf. And of course, historically, there have been weapons that have had faults in mid-flight and have turned around and come back to the coast, forcing everyone to dash off into a cubby hole somewhere. But with this, we had to train them to know when to destroy the missile if it went AWOL. So the scope and the scope of the projects changed from designing stuff that was going into a battlefield, quite small packages of work, to quite large projects which were very, very forward-looking for their time.
So I've now got massive envy because one of the and people who listen to my podcast will know that my big thing I want to get into the space stuff. Elon Musk keeps on not returning my calls or my tweets, but anyway, I'll batten the jealousy down for a bit.
Don't batten the jealousy down, not just yet. Although I'm sworn to secrecy, we may be announcing something quite soon. Something in terms of the future UK space capability, and certainly in the area of extended reality or virtual reality and training. So don't give up hope just yet.
That sounds that's enticing. Anyway, but I guess I'll come back to you.
From Sowerby, I went on to I left Sowerby to join the UK's National Advanced Robotics Research Centre, right, up in Salford, which is a bit of a culture shock, to say the least. So I ended up on the campus of Salford University in a small building to run up what was then politically incorrect way, was called the man-machine interface team,
Right. Yeah.
which was my opening, if you like, into getting something started in the UK with regards to virtual reality. Because one of the things about working in the space field at Sowerby with Laird and others was that we actually got the opportunity to go to space conferences. And one of the space conferences that I went to in Maryland, I bumped into this fantastic guy called Dr. Steve Ellis, who was one of the human factors gurus over at NASA Ames Aerospace Department. Talking to Steve Ellis, he said, well, seeing you're doing this human factors work for the European Space Agency, why don't you nip over to California, as you do, and see what we're up to? And then they managed to sneak me in, because they didn't have the clearance. So they managed to sneak me into NASA in the back of their car. And cut a long story short, I've still got the video of my experience. They put this headset on. They put this, which was basically two pocket televisions from Radio Shack, and a glove that was brimming with fiber optics. And they put me onto this wireframe escalator, and my God, I was going up. My inner ear, which is suffering as we speak, you and I, my inner ear was telling me I was on the ground, but I was going up. I was getting the depth cues. I was getting, and I came back to the UK thinking, wow, this is amazing. Yeah. So at the National Advanced Robotics Research Centre, we then went on to implement a kind of telepresence project where we were linking up the commercial virtual reality kit at the time, including the world's first transputer-based VR computer developed by a company in Chipping Sodbury, which is in fact where I lived or near to where I lived when I was in Filton, and to demonstrate remote driving, remote manipulation, and other forms of VR and augmented reality, and that was just the start.
So would you say that sort of really kicked off your interest in VR and AR and all of that part of it?
Yes, I mean, the experience at NASA, which is now 34 years ago, was an absolute career changer, because I recognised that this ability to have information displayed around you in 3D, or to be able to interact with what ifs. So I was seeing it from a prototyping point of view. That, well, if we can do this today, think about designing jet engines or designing aircraft in the future. This is immense. But I also recognised that it was a technology with human factors needs, because I felt disorientated and dizzy, and I thought, well, there's an awful lot that has to be changed here if people are going to use this in earnest. But it was definitely the change of a career.
So how have you seen the whole VR? I mean, VR was, I guess, the original phrasing. Then we augmented reality, and now you use the title XR. What is the difference between them to the layperson who doesn't understand what the nuances are between them?
Yeah, it is difficult, because there's so many people misusing these terms, particularly on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Virtual reality is all about real-time interaction with computer-generated databases, okay, which may be graphical, maybe sound, maybe smell, maybe haptic. And the aim behind VR has always been to try and exploit the skills that we were born with: so head movement, hand movement, gestures. Augmented reality is where, well, the holy grail of augmented reality is to be able to superimpose virtual objects such as avatars or humans, virtual humans, or virtual platforms, vehicles, whatever, onto the real world. So the idea with AR is that you're making the real world more informative.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. At the moment, we're not there yet with AR. Mixed reality, which is the area I'm working on at the moment, is from a human factors perspective, I think much more powerful, because with mixed reality, what we're doing is we're using real world objects to make the virtual reality more believable. So in the case of some of the medical work we're doing, we're using actual medical kit, because it'd be far too expensive to build those in VR and make them incredibly interactive with a glove. So the idea behind mixed reality is we can see our own hands and arms through a modified headset, and we interact with the key aspects of the training that are being presented as real objects. Right. But then we're using kind of a chroma key approach, so that anything else is virtual, like the inside of a helicopter.
Yeah.
So it is confusing, but fortunately, and it's certainly fortunately for me, we've got a number of demos and what have you that explain to people what the differences actually are.
So, as you've been, I guess you've made this I guess would it be fair to say that you made that the main part of your career, your research career, then going forward. How have you seen it evolve? What's been I guess the biggest step changes that you've seen with this technology?
Yeah, it's a very good question because it hasn't evolved as fast as it should have done. And certainly in the 1990s, we saw the rise and fall of the technology and the applications in a seriously damaging way. Again, people even today, people think of it as being the ultimate in games technology. Well, it may be, but it's got so much more than that. And we found the great thing about the 1990s was that we, in our little team, were able to launch the UK or the world's first virtual reality initiative, sponsored purely by British industry.
Okay.
And including Rolls-Royce and including Vickers Shipbuilding and Engineering, who BAE Systems at Barrow. Yes. So all the stuff that they've been doing recently, over the years on virtual submarines started back in 1993 with this initiative. And
if you are a human factors practitioner or in a related discipline and are not already a member, then do look up the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. They are the professional institution for all human factors practitioners. Find them at www.ergonomics.org.uk.
The writing was on the wall. It was obvious that the technology had so much more to offer, but because the TV and the press that was dominated by companies like Virtuality and their crazy game setup, and people complaining of coming out of a game and barfing and having to sort of drill the headset into their head for it to be stable, and all the hype that went with it, even applications I daren't mention on this podcast. It died. It died a spectacular death towards the end of the 90s.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I mean, if it wasn't for the gaming community, we may still even today be much further behind than we were, because once they started bringing on games like Unreal, and games like that, and not just the games but the editing toolkits that they put out with it, all of a sudden virtual reality became accessible. We weren't trying to do everything on a £250,000, £500,000 Silicon Graphics supercomputer. So that was the biggest step change that I saw, which was gaming, where the virtual reality purists were slagging off gaming as much as they could, but gaming was virtual reality savior.
Okay, that's interesting. That I didn't really appreciate just that was positive and negative impact that the gaming had. It's that's really quite fascinating. So where do you see it going, I guess, in the future? Because there's different people do different things, and different people are claiming to do different things, whether they are or not. What do you see? Where do you see that? What are going to be the big things that we can look forward to? Do you think?
Well, I still think using XR, if you want to call it that, in healthcare still presents a huge number of challenges. It's an area that I'm quite passionate about, and an area that we're working in even to this day with the remnants of my my VR team. Education, I think, is another area where we will see step changes now that companies like Oculus and HTC are bringing out quite credible standalone headsets. So we're not going to have everyone tethered to a computer. So that's going to make things much better in due course, once we persuaded teachers that they can use virtual reality and know the kids don't necessarily know more than you do, because that's quite a barrier to adoption. In terms of engineering, in terms of defense, in terms of transportation, yes, it'll drag along. It will still be used by the BAE Systems and the Kinetics and the Babcocks and the goodness knows who's of this world. But certainly the major challenges are in education and healthcare. I think the one thing the pandemic has showed us too is that there has been an explosion of interest in shared virtual worlds. And shared virtual worlds have been around for decades, but with things with some of the packages that are out there now, where you have these. And personally, I will not go anywhere near them, because you find yourself in this ethereal world surrounded by disembodied avatars that are doing loop-the-loops and goodness knows what else, and look like Japanese anime characters. I can't face that at the moment, but I do think we're on the eve of a new challenge. When you think about things like cybersecurity and you think of things about resilience and what have you, I was writing just this morning about potential security issues associated with these shared virtual worlds. And even things like having really tricky situations, like for example, could you imagine a virtual Manchester arena?
Yes.
And the impact that could have on the avatars and the people who are involved there. Virtual Novichok attack, albeit digitally, sexual stalking, and a whole host of issues that this new technology is going to bring up. We know these things go on online at the moment, but in a virtual world, which is so visual and can have such a major impact on your psyche, I think this is where we're going to see things evolve in a very interesting way. And of course, we've got things like deep fakes as well. I think the deep fakes that we've seen on LinkedIn and AI being able to manipulate the images of persons long dead. Yeah, it's scary.
It is. I guess I don't know, the sort of film I've seen most recently, or the book that I've read, is Ready Player One. The sort of, I think, is the first one that I've seen that really, obviously it's pitched at that sort of elderly teenage level, but it does actually start to hit some of these issues for the first time in almost a way that I think is credible. It's stuff that you can imagine happening in the next few years, and people are spending more time online and as a distraction from real life and that type of thing. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts?
I haven't seen it. I tend to be very picky in the films that I watch these days.
Yeah.
And it is science fiction. Yes, I should go and see it. And you're completely right. And from the book's perspective, I mean, now we know people know what virtual reality is if you stop them in the street.
Yes.
When Gibson brought out Neuromancer, when Stevenson brought out Snow Crash was an excellent book. It didn't have the same impact as Ready Player One has today. Yeah. I'm sure I'll get around to see it at some stage. It's not very high on the list of priorities.
That's fair enough. But it kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning, how we sometimes let fiction inspire what it is that we do. And so I'm still constantly blown away by the fact that we've got so many sort of scientists and engineers trying to replicate the tricorder out of Star Trek and things like that. And it's where does fantasy and reality sort of stop bleeding each other?
It's interesting too, because another one of my pet hates on LinkedIn, which you may have noticed, is when people use the term holodeck, because that more than anything gets my shackles up. In that we are nowhere near having a holodeck. We are nowhere near being able to walk around in a virtual world. We're unshackled. We don't have to wear wearables. We can smell, taste. We can walk for ages. I mean, yes, there are techniques and there are gimmicky games rooms that are out there that are trying to do this. But again, Star Trek and people like Jerry Anderson have done amazing wonders in helping people imagine technology that is in fact with us today. But I think the holodeck is a little. I mean, I won't be around by the time the holodeck finally appears, I have to say, and I'm sure a lot of our current generation human factors students won't be around either.
Yes, but it will. I think if that does come to life at some point, something akin to it will provide us with some interesting challenges.
It does, and then things like deep fake and all the things that I mentioned in terms of really quite nasty types of cybersecurity in virtual space. Again, these things will need to be looked at.
It's almost it's that unintended consequence piece, isn't it, that will provide a lot of challenge.
Yeah.
So to get back to you to a certain more of an extent, what's been your favorite experience in your career to date? What's been like the favorite job or the favorite activity?
Well, I think when I was research director for part of the time the HFI DTC was alive, I mean, I managed to get quite a lot of things done in the real world that I could strike off my bucket list. And I think the DTC and my BAE experience taught me very much that you can't do human factors. You can't do all of human factors from behind a desk.
Yeah.
I have to say there were some people in Saudi who had that mentality that they could design future cockpits from behind a desk without ever even having been near a cockpit, for example. And that's not what human factors is to me. It's getting out and working with the end users and learning to do stuff. And I think from that respect, I suppose I think the offshore work has been the most challenging and experiential. So that's everything. That's involved everything from trying to get urine out of an SBS diving supervisor who juggled with his knives first thing in the morning before coming on shift, to getting stuck in a submarine or a little 3-man submersible at the bottom of Loch Linnhe in Scotland. And if Laird's listening to this, he'll raise his eyebrows because he knew that I ate out on that 13-hour marathon where we were on hydroxide lung scrubbers and the transponder being knocked off the top of the submersible, and we had to be recovered and all that. So those offshore experiences were really changed me.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
I think what attracts a lot of people to the human factors world, I guess, is the ability to go and learn new domains and look at what different people. It's a really good excuse just to go and learn about what other people do without having to become a proper submariner or a proper pilot or anything like that.
Exactly.
You go and stick your nose in and just and have a really good route around.
Yeah.
So, if that's your favourite, what's been your strangest experience?
Two strangest experience. Number one was spending 3 days in the morgue in Johannesburg. That was, ever since then, I have not had any squeamish responses to anything to do with the human body, because the morgue in Johannesburg on a Friday night, what gets brought in makes you think, how on earth can any human do that to another human? And the reason I was there with the defence medics, because I was doing, as best I could, a kind of observational task analysis of various surgical interventions using cadavers.
Right.
So that was strange. The other strange thing, which is in fact related, was a study we did of chicken deboners in a well-known chicken factory in Herefordshire. That was, in terms of, as you say, getting out and sticking your nose in, and on this case being trained to be a chicken deboner, which is a skill that I maintain even to this day, which impresses the hell out of my wife when we have a roast. That was a very interesting experience, very successful project, but a very interesting experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's that beats all of my experiences hand down so far. Fair play. Obviously, we've had the past more than 12. It's sort of 12 months this week that we sort of started going to lockdown and stuff. How have you found working in lockdown?
I think it comes and goes in terms of, I mean, my wife and I, since retiring, we got ourselves a little sort of static home down in Cornwall. We missed that dreadfully, because to get out and just to get out into the real world, get away from the virtual world and the computer world and into the real world is something we miss. I mean, I've been quite lucky in that, amongst other things, I tend to build I've got a stockpile of 1960s science fiction models, which I've been building and not just building them, but super detailing them with undercarriage detail and what have you. That's kept me going. I have been writing papers, written a couple with my colleagues at the Royal Centre for Defence Medicine, and as I say, since having retired, I am involved in a number of little tiny projects, multiple tiny projects, which chisel away at each day, at the hours of each day. So it's kept me going. But you're looking around at other members of the family, looking around at everything else. I think I've been lucky, because there are people out there who, and those that are alone, who have really suffered psychologically from this pandemic, and it's very cruel.
Yes, no, it's all very easy to say, I think, that we can stay at home, we can be connected and all that sort of stuff. But I think, well, certainly from a personal perspective, it's made me value, other interactions that you have. That I love my family dearly, but you want to be able to go out and even just the humble pint at the pub has way more value than I fully appreciated.
Yeah, it was, again, being lucky in terms of getting out, because I live in Droitwich, so it's not, the town is an open space, but we've been lucky in that just literally 5 minutes from where I live, there's an old derelict building that goes back to Henry VIII, and the local council and archaeological societies have secured it. It's a listed building, and it's in a very, very bad state. And we've been looking at trying to help them with a virtual reality reconstruction. So I've been able to go down the road with my drone and do some various surveys, 3D construction from drone videos. So again, it's one of those things that it just keeps you focused. Yes.
So I guess to sort of wrap up then, what do you think the next 12, 24 months hold for you? What sort of things do you want to get stuck into?
I want to do a lot more virtual heritage work. I'm very passionate about using VR to make the invisible visible, if you like. I've been taking students down to the West Country for many years and getting them to try out new tech on Dartmoor or at sea and what have you. And I enjoy that, and I want more of that. So we are talking. We're collaborating with a small company in Plymouth now with the hope of actually making that happen in the fullness of time. And really, I mean, at my age, I've got no. I'm ticking off most of the bucket list things. I mean, for example, a few weeks ago, just before the second lockdown, I was able to go to Cosford, RAF Cosford, and the museum, and sit in the cockpit of the TSR-2. That's something I've always wanted to do. Yeah. And we did a 3D scan around the aircraft as well. So it's things like that. It's little opportunities, and it's the same for the remnants of my team. It's getting out there and making a difference. Getting out there and doing STEM work with kids and public engagement activities with people who have got no idea what's on their doorstep in terms of hidden heritage. Yeah. So that if I can carry on doing that kind of thing for the next 2 years at least, I will be a happy bunny.
Brilliant. Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you ever so much for giving up a whole chunk of your day. And keep well, and I hope to catch up again soon.
Likewise, thank you, Barry. Thanks for the great questions.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us at www.barrykirby.co.uk and on Twitter at @BAZ_K. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.